Next up, I'd like to welcome Adrian Cooper and Tim Pritchard from Shropshire Council. Just a little bit about Adrian and Tim, if I may. So Adrian has worked for Shropshire Council in various roles since 1992. However, in late 2019, he was appointed to lead a small task force which is driving Shropshire Council's response to climate change. The council here has set itself the target of achieving net zero carbon by 2030, and Adrian's growing team has developed a strategy and action plan to deliver this outcome to all of us here. I think prior to this role, Adrian was a planning policy manager and he led the review of the Shropshire Local Plan. He's got various degrees, one in geography, environmental management, and environmental planning. Has got a personal strong interest in sustainable resource management and the circular economy. Adrian's also appeared as a speaker at various national and international conferences on these topics, so is perfect today to talk about climate change. And then a little introduction about Tim as well, if I may. So Tim is the Shrewsbury Programme Manager, and Tim's responsible for curating and delivering the Shrewsbury Big Town Plan through the Big Town Plan Partnership. And I think this comprises of Shropshire Council, the Shropshire Town Council, and the Shropshire Business Improvement District. I hope I've got that right. Initially, Tim qualified in landscape and urban design, but has subsequently gained extensive experience in the full life cycle of regeneration and the development, from inception and design through to the management and delivery of large-scale transformational programs. So both brilliantly placed to do a double act on climate change, challenge and opportunities for Shropshire. Over to you, Adrian and Tim.
Thank you, Juliana. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So I'm going to do a short introductory piece, just a bit of context really, looking at what Shropshire Council's doing and how we see the challenge of climate change in Shropshire and the opportunities that might present for us, including a number of the themes that Joe and previous speakers have already touched on. And Tim will follow on with a piece more specifically focused on Shrewsbury and the Big Town Plan. So hopefully this will all work.
You're on mute, Adrian. Sorry.
Apologies. Thank you. Wrong button. So yeah, I'm just going to cover off our strategy and some of the projects with which we're involved, focused around these three main themes. I'm going to just touch on adaptation and resilience as well towards the end, because that is a significant challenge that we've yet to get to grips with, frankly. Right. Okay, just looking at the carbon context for Shropshire then, this is a little bit dated in terms of the information now, but I'm afraid I haven't had an opportunity to update the slide. It is, however, indicative, I think, of Shropshire's carbon footprint using current BIS data. So it's about 1.75 million tonnes, round about that. Around a third of that relates to road transport. If we were to include the exported emissions that Joe referred to in his presentation, actually a better measure of our carbon footprint is nearer 6 million tonnes. So you can get a sense of how much we're currently exporting. Domestic energy use, referring back to Richard's earlier presentation, so domestic property is around about a quarter. It is, or has been, moving in the right sort of direction, but nothing like fast enough, I would suggest, to actually reach a net zero or even a net negative, of course, position in the sort of time frame we need to do. So it's difficult to track it accurately, but that is a rough pen picture of where we think we are. In terms of impacts then, what sorts of things might climate change mean for Shropshire? We, as a local authority, it's essential that we consider this in terms of the impact on our service delivery and communities and businesses. Clearly, there are physical impacts, mostly focused around extreme weather events, flash flooding. Obviously, we're no strangers to flooding in Shropshire with the River Severn and other rivers, but extensive water damage and issues around surface water drainage. The famous pothole issue derives in part from the adequacy or otherwise of drainage and the design of our rural roads. And as Joe's already mentioned, significant potential impacts on agriculture and food production. That relates also, of course, in terms of plant, animal and human health impacts. There's a whole health and well-being agenda in here, and it's a truism, I think, that climate change is likely to impact the worst on those who are most vulnerable and least able to adapt to the impacts that it will have. In terms of our own organisation, then, obviously, I've mentioned service delivery. The cost and complexity of our service delivery will be affected by climate change, as well as our own staff well-being and productivity, and those of the service users who we're here to help. And all of this comes at a cost. There will be potentially a significant cost, and I'm with Joe. I think the cost of not doing enough, frankly, is far greater than the cost of actually getting to grips with this early, which is what we're attempting to do. So there's also a lot of green growth potential, which I know Richard has touched on, and I'd heartily echo his comments on that as well. So what's our strategy? Shropshire Council's aiming to try and get to at least net zero anyway by 2030. And there are three parts to our strategy. We're trying to, as an organisation, to reduce our carbon emissions. And we are doing that. Again, not quite as fast as I think we would have liked, but it takes time, I'm afraid, to build some of this stuff up, particularly looking at our own buildings and transport choices, and trying to improve our performance in that regard. We're also looking very closely now at our indirect emissions. We're not just measuring our direct emissions, but our indirect emissions actually comprise more than 80% of the council's footprint. So it's essential that we look at our procurement systems and attempt to lever in benefits through the supply chain. Also looking in terms of powering up, we've adopted a target of becoming energy self-sufficient by 2030, and this plays to the point that Joe was making about the end of renewable obligation certificates, perhaps, and an opportunity to generate significant amounts of power in Shropshire, potentially for export to adjacent areas. And the final part of that then is around very much a theme that Joe was focused on, the whole biomass, capture type process, and looking at how we can use our own land and then work with others to promote carbon capture and storage through land management activity. So looking in a little bit more detail, the sorts of things we're involved with under that Power Down heading, we're trialling some new smart charging equipment. We've got an active programme of electric vehicle charging installations as a form of what will be fairly essential infrastructure. Also looking at green hydrogen. I know it's very close to Joe's heart. We're looking particularly at green hydrogen in the context of its use as a commercial vehicle fuel. And there are particular opportunities in Shropshire with regard to some specific sectors which are prevalent. And I'm thinking here particularly of agriculture and minerals, both of which are quite prominent in the Shropshire economy, where there are opportunities to generate any more energy self-sufficiency for those businesses, looking at the way those units operate and their ability to generate power and create vehicle fuel off the back of that. We've just won an award actually for a carbon neutral road surfacing programme. At the moment we still need roads, and I suspect we probably always will to some extent. How do we carry out our services and maintenance programmes in a way which has a light touch in carbon terms? This is an example of how it can be done. Also looking at our own buildings, we have a very large portfolio of buildings, several hundred, and of those it's possible to improve a large number of them, but it is expensive to do so, and we need government grant assistance to do that. And we're also looking, as well as a retrofit activity, at how we can up the specification of new buildings that we might be commissioning, looking at their whole lifetime carbon performance. There's a significant piece around a sort of corporate governance. So all of our decisions now are screened as a mandatory requirement for their carbon performance. And I've mentioned already the opportunity to update our procurement policies. This is an active project at the moment, starting to ask our supply chain, well, how much carbon will you be emitting for whatever it is that you're going to be doing for us? That's the start. I suspect in time that may have a little bit more bite, and we will be expecting not only to understand what the carbon emissions will be, but how they will be reduced. And lest we forget, our strategy is focused on Shropshire Council's corporate footprint, but our corporate footprint is actually less than 1% of that of the county. So we have a much wider role to play in terms of supporting the actions of others. And we're working particularly closely with Zero Carbon Shropshire. We're a founder member of that organisation, and we are actively supporting them through grant funding and other activity to roll out a wider programme of measures and projects which will help others to improve their own performance. Also bidding, working with others on things like local housing associations. We've just picked up a great deal of money through government funding to do retrofit activity on social housing, for example, and for those in fuel poverty. And various other bits and pieces going on, which we don't need to go into at this point. In terms of low carbon energy, we've got opportunities to develop solar generation on our own land, and we are working actively with SCAP and with the local electricity companies to try and map out a future for our power network, which will capture all the opportunities that Joe's previously mentioned. That also extends to heat, where we're working with government funding to explore the potential to capture heat from our existing energy recovery plant, and also within Shrewsbury Town Centre, which is something I'm sure Tim might touch on as well. And finally here, we are actively working now with the agricultural sector and minerals, as I mentioned, particularly around the topic of biochar. There's an opportunity here to achieve multiple wins in terms of the agendas that Joe's referenced, for example, around biodiversity and sustainable flood management, which of course will be an issue for resilience in future, but also to capture and store carbon within soils particularly. And just as a taster, it is roughly 3 times more efficient to store, capture and store carbon in soils as it is to plant a tree. Woodland soils, which is where most of the carbon resides, not in the timber itself, don't store as much carbon as, for example, wetland. And wetland creation, I suspect, will be, and appropriate wetland management will be really important tools in our toolbox for tackling climate change through carbon capture and storage. We're also doing a whole load of tree planting as well, but none of these things is a panacea. It needs a mixture of different activities. And lastly here then, adaptation and resilience. As I say, this is something we're still getting to grips with. We know that Shropshire will be affected by more extreme weather. We can start to work out what that might look like, but how exactly one tackles and prepares for that eventuality and helps particularly those more vulnerable residents to adapt to those circumstances is a challenge that we've yet to get stuck into, but we are looking to hold a conference, for example, next May, which will pick up and run with theme specifically. Okay, thank you. I'll hand over now to Tim.
Thanks, Adrian. Are you happy to just do my slides for me? It's probably the easiest way, isn't it? So thank you for that, Adrian. Yeah, so Adrian's obviously set a good scene for what's happening across the county. I suppose I've just got a few slides here. And we'll start with the next one, Adrian, if you don't mind. Just showing how the Big Town Plan is starting to respond positively to some of these imperatives, I guess. And I suppose that just as a quick scene setter, the Big Town Plan in 2018 is still robust, and we've got lots of great support for the principle of the town plan. More recently, we've had a master plan vision that's just been subject to consultation, and we're going to be revising that document and republishing it again, the final version, hopefully in the early part of next year. Next one, Adrian, if you don't mind. one of the changes, I guess, from 2018 to now in the vision piece and the other work we're doing is that some of the implicit messages of the town plan have become a bit more explicit. And if you use the example, for example, of heritage and in the town, in and around the town, so it's not just linked to the meander of the river by any means, but heritage was something that was quite implicit in the original document, and yet it's one of our greatest strengths and unique characteristics of the place of Shrewsbury and indeed Shropshire. So that was just one example where, as you can see now, is one of these 4 big moves. It's bringing it into the front focus and giving it some presence. And in a similar way, I guess that it's probably a bit behind when it should have happened, but the imperatives that now should be driving the big town plan are driving the big town plan include things like health and well-being, air quality, and in particular the climate change imperatives, especially in certain aspects around sort of adaptation and resilience. So the master plan vision has given us an opportunity to start to move towards delivery, but at the same time those delivery interventions have got to be a lot more robust around why we're doing them. So we're doing a lot of obviously place-based work, but that sounds very good, but what does that actually mean? Can I have the next one, Adrian, please? So what we've been doing, and is still in process at the moment, is a culmination of all the work, not just the vision piece, but lots of strands of work are going on at the moment. And as Adrian says, we're in a partnership space. So we've got the 3 core partners in the Big Town Plan Partnership, but there is an extensive network now of stakeholders involved and supporting us. And Adrian's in particular in that camp as well, helping us reach out and understand a little bit more. What I suppose COVID has allowed us to do is to look at some of these things through a different lens. It's actually allowed us to test some things that we were probably at best would have been medium-term interventions, but actually now COVID's allowed us to test some things in the town that we were told could or shouldn't happen or would be at some time away. With that, we've started a process of prioritising activities and projects within the town. And that's partly driven by availability of resources, and we need to focus on what we can achieve rather than trying to do everything. But I suppose some of those criteria that we've used now are providing a bit more rigor to that. And what I've just shared in there's a sort of emerging list of priorities that, and those ones I've put in green there, we feel when you put it through the lens of obviously the carbon and the climate change debate, what is it, can they drive and help with, but more importantly, is the justification for doing some of these things. So I've just broadly sort of, they won't mean much in isolation, but beginning to see that the priorities are underpinned, by some of the carbon debate that we're talking to with many colleagues. We've got lots of partners on board as well in terms of those stakeholder partners reach out to the rail infrastructure people. We've got a really good sort of working relationship across the piece with some of the big infrastructure players, and obviously all the other interested parties within that. I suppose from this then has come sort of, just for today, there's sort of 2 strands I wanted to share today really. One is around movement. So Adrian, if we go on to the next one, if you don't mind. Around movement and development. So are we going on to that? Yeah, here we go. Thank you. So not surprisingly, movement is a huge issue for the town centre, and I suppose it can be contentious, but at the same time we often say that one of the greatest constraints for Shrewsbury is one of its greatest opportunities. The fact that we're in the tight, fine-grained world that we've got in the town centre and then within the meander of the river, actually, yes, it physically gives us some challenges, but actually you can't fit much more in. So let's make the best of what we've got. And I suppose there's a whole rebalancing around the public, so the public realm and movement and how people access the town by what means and how, and the connectivity and all the other place-based stuff that we talk about quite readily. But I suppose what's really starting to crystallise now is that the movement strategy in Shrewsbury needs to come forward, because it's going to inform so many things physically and also from a management point of view. But again, what's really coming to the front now is that the movement strategy that we're just about to commission in the next few weeks, which again there's an ask and an invite to get involved with this, is that actually it's led by those place-based things around air quality, health and well-being. How do we encourage more active engagement with the town and reduce the reliance on private vehicles, whether they're electric or combustion engine, isn't really the point. It's the fact that they're very spatially inefficient things. How can we actually release some of that public realm and do other things? So those drivers now, I suppose, and working with our highways colleagues, traditionally we would have looked at volumes of vehicles and how do we access the town and how do we get them in and out and those sorts of things. There's very much a commitment now that the climate change imperatives and air quality and health and well-being drive what we're trying to achieve, and then what are the physical responses and the transport responses to that. Clearly it has a massive impact on the economic growth and success of the town, and I think we're already in a very strong position, but we are a little bit of a tipping point in terms of, if we don't start to address some issues, we could end up with some quite adverse effects. So at a very local level, the movement strategy is there, really designed to obviously drive the place-led agenda. However, we're more and more increasingly, and now it is a primary driver, that the climate change adaptation and resilience piece linked into other activities is key to that. So next one, please, Adrian. So just a quick couple of sketches just to show what's currently in the vision and the context, I guess, to the movement strategy. It's more than just what's in the town, and even these drawings don't do justice in terms of how that impact can spread to the rural communities. Clearly the county town, as with all the other market towns and villages, is very important how we get that accessibility in the most sort of balanced way that we can. So the strategy is obviously going to be cognizant of how does this wider piece fit in, and obviously that overall connectivity and accessibility is key. But what is the way we can do it in a more robust way? I suppose I've put a little line on there. What's good for us isn't necessarily what we want. I think that we're in a very good position in Shrewsbury and Shropshire, that we've got a overwhelming support generally for the principles of what's trying to be achieved in Shrewsbury in terms of reducing traffic levels for the whole range of reasons, and promoting better forms of transport, I guess, and movement, and I think that's really coming strong forward, and I think we've got a lot of work to do with that. But that whole modal shift thing about providing choice, and at the same time, in providing that choice, what are the opportunities to reach out a little bit further in terms of how do the supply chains feed into that. So I think the movement and public realm strategy is probably our number one thing at the moment, that again is going to be going live in the next few weeks. So hopefully you'll see plenty of activity in social media and that, and invitations. Just to clarify that, like I say, it's a partnership-led piece of work with Town Council and BID and Shropshire Council. As I say, the interest is far greater than that. I think there's overwhelming support, if not a bit of frustration, I guess. Everybody knows what needs to happen. Can we just get on and do it? I think we've heard that message already today. It has got strong cross party support, and there is actually a steering group and delivery group set up to do this now, that's led by the leader and the deputy leader of Shropshire Council, alongside political representation from the Town Council and BID board directors as well. I think the first thing that's going to happen with that piece of work, and this is again the offer and the invite, is that we've made a case to say that a significant proportion of this movement and then public realm strategy will be a stakeholder engagement piece. As you can probably imagine, we haven't got overly polarised views, but there are quite a lot of interested stakeholders. And it's very, very diverse. Anything like this is going to be significant. So we're seeing at least a 4 to 5 week consultation period, but it's actually not going to be consultation in the true sense. It's more going to be engagement about making sure that all the groups that clearly have a view and an interest are given the opportunity to share those thoughts and help shape the strategy. And I think a lot of that is held around, how do we get more sustainable movement and modal shifts that does all the climate change and carbon imperatives that we're all familiar with, and then how do we balance that off in terms of delivery. Can I have the next one then, Adrian? Thank you. So I say the other thread, I guess, where the big town plan really wants to show some leadership is in terms of when development starts coming forward. We've got this is a public document. Again, this is out for consultation, the Smithfield Riverside development framework. It's a document of principles. I'll say that probably the image that you can see there is probably is illustrative how those principles could be applied, not necessarily will be applied. Having said that, I think, you know, a lot of people are seeing that as the solution, and I think that's something we've got to deal with, because we're not at that point yet. We're just sort of saying, you know, if the principles are sound, how could they be applied? Within that, obviously, there's significant opportunity for the council, because we own a significant, if not all of this site in some form or other. We don't own the Premier Inn, but we own pretty well everything else you can see down there. So we've got a real opportunity to lead here, but not on our own, with the partnership again. But how can we actually demonstrate, and comes back to what I think what Adrian was talking about there in terms of our own asset portfolio. You know, how do we balance off sort of demolition or deconstruction maybe and repurposing of assets to be as sensitive as possible. So we're doing quite a lot of work around this now, and again with Adrian's help and others, that we're starting to take a more climate change impact approach to that. So actually getting into some of the, I guess, assumptions that we're living with at the moment. A lot of assumptions are out there. We need to test them. Exactly how do these imperatives work? How do they influence development? Clearly, we see an opportunity here of whether we're developing out the site in the future ourselves or with partners. How can we actually instill that, you know, move towards a low net zero, net negative, if that's possible, then that's something we should be leading on. And I think there is a real strong commitment now to do that. Sort of in those delivery terms, there's quite a lot just for Riverside to start thinking about in terms of, as we've got there, flood resilience, the heat and energy networks, repurposing, deconstruction or replacement. How do we manage that? How do we actually get it sorted? And I think we've started to look at that in a more whole life appraisal process. So I think, you know, we live in a world where, you know, these things take a while, but we should start sooner rather than later. I think those whole life appraisals and life cycle assessments that we've been doing have started to demonstrate that, you know, there's a little bit of analogy, isn't there, about, you know, it's 20% to build something and 80% to own it. That's probably changing in those percentages, but it's still just highlighting the life cycle of some of these things. Not only are they there for several generations, but actually what is their net impact over their lifetime is probably more important than how we build them. So we're then coming back to how we build them. We need to build them to be more resilient along the life. So I think there's a task there for, and an opportunity, especially for Shropshire Council with partners, to bring development out of the ground that actually does raise the game on that and say, well, actually, we might be investing a little bit more at the front end because we know in the long game it's going to pay dividends. And that isn't just about carbon performance, it's about resilience and adaptability, so that again we reduce the need to demolish in the future, and how can we repurpose and make things adaptable and flexible. The other thing I've just put on there as well is this isn't just something because we feel we should be doing it. We're now seeing it as a prerequisite in the market. You know, if some of the assessments we've been doing recently is that, you know, certain developments we could do certain ways, but actually it's not really attractive. It's not good enough for the market, which is actually quite encouraging now. And I think COVID again has demonstrated that health and well-being in the workplace is one aspect of it and one of many aspects, but actually we're obliged now to build good stuff, and I think this is really helpful that the market is actually demanding that. We have got some pressures in Shrewsbury in terms of rental values and to make that work, but again the market won't do it for us at the moment because those rental values aren't there. However, again, the leadership and commitment by the council and partners, there is an opportunity because of our land holding and control here that we can possibly make this work where others can't, which again just demonstrates that commitment and then responds to the market, and then hopefully the market will then do it for themselves. So a little bit of an example there of how we're trying to use, you know, the development to start to bring some of these real imperatives front and center, and hopefully that gives you a little bit of example. So next one, Adrian. I think I've just got one more slide just to sort of sum up a little bit really. So I suppose the thing for us around the big town plan, it's more than the town, we know that, but we use this the cliche around place-led leadership and commitment, and I think this is about how do we now actually start to change the place to respond to these. And I think, you know, some of these are a long game as we've got there, but there's an urgency to crack on and get and do it. There's definitely an urgency from the partnership to start moving into delivery. the opportunities in Shrewsbury are far greater than the challenges. I think that's what we're all excited about, and the one way to demonstrate that is through impact assessments of whatever form that we take, and that robust sort of evidential data-led basis that we can actually say, no, we can actually measure the impact of this. Some of it is pretty defined and some of it is at the behest of the market, but we feel pretty confident at the moment. And I think, you know, from the partnership space, that partnership hasn't got closed doors. We absolutely open it to everybody, and hopefully, you know, through the stuff that's all currently live, like the Riverside SDF, that consultation is still live. So again, an invitation to engage with that. As brutal as you want to be with us, we're not precious, and we've still got a lot to do. The strategy coming forward for the public realm and movement, that's something, again, we'll be reaching out to many stakeholders. Anybody interested in getting involved with that, hopefully you'll see it through press anyway, but in the short term, if you want to contact me or others, then we can do that through the partnership. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour where we are in terms of commitments. I'll probably sum up by saying there is huge opportunity for us to really demonstrate how Shropshire, and Shrewsbury in particular, can start to bring forward some of the carbon imperatives. But then it's also what can that agenda do for the big town plan, because actually it's a totally, you know, mutually supportive. And I know, working with Adrian and others, this is something that we really want to get into now. It's the stronger rationale by which we're going to do things. So I think there's more we can be doing. There's a lot more to be done. So we've got to up our game a little bit, but that's something we're really doing at the moment. And hopefully that just gives you a little bit of a flavour of a couple of examples where we're beginning to bring this now to be more explicit consideration in what the big town plan is about and how it's going to deliver. Okay, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tim. I do apologise. I have got a dog barking in the background, so I'll thank you, Adrian and Tim. That's really interesting. Golly, you really have got your work cut out over the next few years, without a doubt. Thank you, Adrian, for talking about all the kind of physical impacts and the relationship with plant and animal and human impacts, the potential organisational impacts for the council as well, and those are kind of associated costs for achieving, you know, the local net zero 2030 carbon target, and also Tim, you know, for, I guess, linking climate change around connection, communities, heritage and quality, and those particular characterful public spaces that we've got here in Shropshire. Our heritage and conservation in particular is absolutely phenomenal, as anybody on the call knows here, or hopefully leading to what will be a kind of place-based spatial leader going forward. And I'm sure, you know, this can be replicated through other rural communities in and around the UK as well, not just here in Shropshire. Okay, so thank you ever so much, Tim and Adrian from Shropshire Council.